I learned something really interesting about human behavior the year I bought my first house in Arizona. Some people don't actually see boundaries unless those boundaries cost them money. And trust me, my neighbor learned that lesson the expensive way. See, I bought this little starter home in late 2020, nothing flashy, just a quiet cul-de-sac in Mesa with a one-car garage, a short concrete driveway, and exactly enough privacy for me to feel like I'd finally escaped apartment life. I was proud of that place too. Man, first property I ever owned, first thing in my life that actually felt stable. Every paycheck, every overtime shift, every weekend I skipped going out, all of that turned into that driveway, that garage, that little patch of concrete sitting in front of my house. Then came my neighbor, Denise. Denise lived directly across from me with her husband Rick, and those two operated like they were preparing for the end of civilization. They had trucks everywhere. One giant black Silverado, one rusty landscaping pickup that leaked oil, a camper trailer parked halfway into the street, and then Denise's silver Honda Accord floating around the neighborhood like an annoying little satellite. Their garage? Completely unusable. I'm talking floor-to-ceiling chaos, broken lamps, old mattresses, Christmas decorations from what looked like 3 presidential administrations ago. You couldn't fit a bicycle in there, let alone a vehicle. So naturally, Denise started treating my driveway like overflow parking. The first time it happened, I genuinely thought maybe she had guests over or somebody was blocking her space, so I kept it friendly. I walked outside, saw her Accord sitting there like it paid property taxes, and left a polite little note on the windshield. Hey, please don't park in my driveway. Thanks. Simple. Respectful. She moved it maybe 20 minutes later. No drama. No confrontation. I figured that was the end of it. Yeah. Not even close. 3 days later, I came home from work and there it was again. Same car. Same spot. Like we'd somehow entered a silent agreement I never signed. So this time I walked over and knocked on her door. Denise answered holding a wine glass, smiling like we were old friends. I said, "Hey, I noticed your car's in my driveway again." And she laughed. Actually laughed, then hit me with, "Oh, relax. I was only there for a couple minutes." Couple minutes. Here's the thing though. My doorbell camera covered the entire driveway. She'd been there 47 minutes. 47. Long enough to cook dinner, watch half a sitcom, maybe reorganize another pile of junk in that disaster garage of hers. And the crazy part wasn't even the lying. It was how casual she was about it. Like my property existing for her convenience was somehow normal. That's when I started noticing the pattern. Denise never asked permission, never apologized, never even acknowledged she was doing something wrong. She'd pull in, grab her purse, slam the door, and walk straight into her house without even looking back. Like my driveway was public infrastructure funded by the city. Then one Saturday morning it escalated. I was halfway through making coffee when I heard tires outside. I looked through the blinds and watched Denise pull into my driveway again. Except this time her own driveway was completely empty. Empty. She just didn't feel like moving one of the trucks. That's it. That was the reason. Convenience. And I remember standing there in my kitchen thinking, this isn't absent-minded behavior anymore. This is entitlement. There's a difference. Big difference. One comes from distraction. The other comes from believing the rules don't apply to you. So I started documenting everything. Every parking incident, every timestamp, every camera clip. I made a folder on my desktop labeled Denise, which, honestly, already sounds like the beginning of a suburban horror movie. But the more evidence I collected, the clearer something became. This woman genuinely believed nobody would ever push back on her. And people like that, they usually keep escalating until reality finally punches back. Now let me pause the story for a second, because this is where a lot of people make the wrong move emotionally. They either explode too early, or they stay quiet so long that the entitled neighbor starts believing they actually own the situation. And honestly, HOA neighborhoods are full of this weird little power psychology. People test boundaries constantly. Parking spaces, trash bins, fence lines, noise complaints. Not because they desperately need the space, but because they're subconsciously checking whether anybody's willing to enforce the boundary. This is a psychological trap. Once someone gets away with a small violation repeatedly, their brain starts reframing your property as shared territory. That's why Denise stopped asking permission so fast. In her head, the driveway had already become not a big deal. According to standard procedure in most U.S. cities, especially suburban HOA areas, private driveway enforcement usually falls into this gray zone where police don't want to escalate unless there's documentation. That's why emotional arguments almost never work. The moment you start yelling, suddenly both neighbors look equally unreasonable. From a legal perspective, documentation is everything. Timestamps, camera footage, written complaints, warning records, posted signage. The system rewards the calm person, not the loud person. And honestly, that's the part a lot of entitled neighbors don't understand. They think kindness means weakness. They mistake patience for permission. But patience with documentation behind it? That's dangerous. Because once somebody decides to stop arguing emotionally and start following procedure, the consequences become very real, very fast. And Denise was about to find that out the hard way. So after that point, I stopped treating Denise like a difficult neighbor and started treating the situation like a process. No more knocking on doors. No more awkward conversations across the fence. No more trying to appeal to basic respect, because clearly that currency meant absolutely nothing to her. Everything became documentation. Every time her Accord touched my driveway, my phone came out automatically. Picture, timestamp, short written note in my log. Date, time, duration. It sounds obsessive until you've dealt with somebody who lies casually to your face. Once somebody does that, you learn real quick that memory means nothing and evidence means everything. And the funny thing is, Denise had no idea the game had changed. She still walked around with this smug little confidence like she was the unofficial mayor of the cul-de-sac. Sometimes she'd even wave at me after parking there, which honestly made it more irritating somehow. Like she genuinely believed friendliness canceled out disrespect. Meanwhile, I'd already started researching local ordinances. I spent an entire Sunday night reading Mesa municipal parking codes while eating leftover takeout, and buried in all that legal language was the answer. Private property towing. Turns out Arizona law is extremely clear about unauthorized vehicles on residential property, but only if the homeowner follows procedure exactly. That part matters. According to standard procedure, you can't just wake up angry and have somebody's car dragged away because your feelings got hurt. You need visible signage, proper notice, registered towing authorization. Everything has to be documented cleanly, so there's no argument later. And honestly, I love that. Because systems don't care about emotions. Systems care about paperwork. So Monday after work, I went all in. I ordered 2 reflective, unauthorized vehicles will be towed at owner's expense signs, mounted one beside the garage and another near the sidewalk entrance. Big bright lettering too. Impossible to miss unless you were legally blind or spiritually committed to ignoring consequences. Then I contacted a licensed towing company the city approved for residential enforcement. They walked me through the process, registered my address, verified the signage placement, and basically told me, once the waiting period passes, just call us. That was it. Clean. Professional. No drama. Which made what happened next even funnier. 4 days later, 4 days, Denise rolled right back into my driveway like she was clocking into work. I watched the whole thing through my front window while pretending to wipe down the kitchen counter. She parked crooked too, which somehow felt disrespectful on a personal level. Then she grabbed 2 grocery bags and walked straight inside her house without even glancing at the tow signs. Didn't hesitate. Didn't second-guess herself. That level of confidence honestly deserves academic study. I waited maybe 30 seconds, just long enough for her front door to close. Then I picked up my phone and called the towing company. The dispatcher actually laughed when she pulled up my address because apparently she remembered the registration paperwork from earlier that week. 20 minutes later, the tow truck rolled into the neighborhood. And let me tell you something. The sound of chains clinking behind somebody else's bad decisions is deeply therapeutic. I stood in my living room pretending to scroll my phone while that Accord got lifted off my driveway inch by inch. Whole operation took maybe 3 minutes. Efficient. Surgical. Beautiful. About an hour later, Denise came storming across the street like a woman auditioning for a reality show. She was furious. Face red, arms flailing, screaming before I even opened the door. "Where's my car?" I leaned against the doorway and said, "Probably at the impound lot." The silence after that sentence, incredible. You could literally watch her brain buffering. Then came the explosion. "You had my car towed." Like, yes, Denise, The giant warning signs and registered towing authorization were apparently not decorative artwork. She started ranting about how she was only there temporarily, which was particularly funny considering every illegal parker in human history apparently believes temporary parking becomes legal through confidence alone. Then she threatened to call the police. I told her she absolutely should. Matter of fact, I handed her the ordinance printout I'd already highlighted, along with the incident number from the previous warning officer. That changed the energy immediately. You know that moment when somebody realizes the other person prepared way more than they did? Yeah, that. She stopped yelling for a second and just stared at the paperwork. But embarrassment quickly turned back into anger. Denise muttered something about me being petty and stormed off to call an Uber because the impound lot was almost 40 minutes away. Here's the part that makes me laugh to this day, though. She didn't pick the car up immediately. She waited 2 full days, which meant storage fees kicked in. So instead of paying around $280, she ended up paying closer to $375, because walking 10 extra feet from her own driveway was apparently too much hardship. And for a while, peace returned. My driveway stayed empty, quiet, beautiful. I remember backing into it one evening after work and actually appreciating the absurdity that I now felt grateful to use property I already owned. But entitlement doesn't disappear overnight. Sometimes people convince themselves the first consequence was just bad luck. 3 weeks later, I heard tires outside again. And I already knew. I didn't even rush to the window this time. I just sighed, looked through the blinds, and there was Denise's Accord sitting in my driveway again like some toxic ex texting you up at 2 a.m. To this day, I genuinely don't know whether she forgot, got lazy, or wanted to test whether I'd really do it twice. But here's the thing about boundaries. If you enforce them once and then back down later, you teach people the line is negotiable. So I made the exact same phone call. Same towing company. Same dispatcher. Except this time she recognized my voice immediately and just went, "Again?" I said, "Again." Then I made coffee while waiting for the truck. That's the part one think bothered Denise most eventually. Not the towing itself, but how emotionally detached I became from it. No screaming. No revenge speech. No confrontation. Just process. Her car disappeared for the second time while I sat at my kitchen table drinking Colombian roast and watching YouTube videos about restoring old motorcycles. Meanwhile, Denise had a much worse afternoon. Her husband apparently needed both trucks for work that day, so she had no ride to the impound lot, which meant she had to pay for another Uber across town. And because Karma occasionally hires comedy writers, she'd also forgotten groceries in the back seat. I actually watched her walking back down the street later carrying 2 melting bags of frozen food, looking absolutely defeated. That image stayed with me. Not because I enjoyed humiliating her. Honestly, by that point, I mostly just felt exhausted. But because that was the exact moment reality finally broke through the entitlement. She looked embarrassed. Not angry. Embarrassed. Big difference. Angry people still think they're right. Embarrassed people finally understand how they look to everyone else. After that second tow, the neighborhood shifted a little too. See, suburban neighborhoods run on gossip like small towns used to. People noticed. A couple neighbors casually asked what happened, and once they heard the full story, every single one had the same reaction. Wait? She was parking in your driveway? Because even the most conflict-avoidant people understand that crossing somebody's property line repeatedly is insane behavior. Suddenly, Denise wasn't the harmless, quirky neighbor anymore. She became that woman. And HOA communities are brutal once public opinion flips against you. But somehow, she still did it one more time. Third incident. Middle of the afternoon. I almost respected the commitment at that point. There was no dramatic confrontation left in me either. No anger. No adrenaline. Honestly, it felt like renewing a subscription. I saw the car, called the company, confirmed the vehicle description, and went back inside before the tow truck even arrived. That third tow ended everything permanently. No screaming at my door. No angry notes. No fake friendliness after that. Denise simply stopped. Completely. And over the next few months, something weird happened. She avoided eye contact entirely. Anytime we ended up outside at the same time, she suddenly became fascinated with checking her mailbox or watering plants that clearly didn't need water. It was like the woman who once treated my driveway as community property now couldn't even acknowledge its existence. Between towing fees, storage penalties, Uber rides, missed work time, and whatever dignity got left behind at that impound lot. Using my driveway cost her somewhere north of $800. $800 to learn a lesson most adults understand in kindergarten. And the craziest part? I never raised my voice once. I never threatened her. Never vandalized anything. Never escalated emotionally. I just followed procedure carefully enough that reality handled the argument for me. Looking back now, the whole thing was never really about a driveway. I know that sounds dramatic, but anybody who's owned property for long enough understands this. Boundaries are emotional before they're physical. That little strip of concrete represented my time, my work, my sacrifices, my stability. And when somebody repeatedly ignores a boundary you've clearly communicated, what they're really saying is, my convenience matters more than your ownership. That's why situations like this get under people's skin so deeply. It stops being about parking almost immediately. It becomes about respect. The lesson here is, entitlement survives on hesitation. People like Denise usually count on one thing. Most normal adults hate conflict. We want to keep the peace, avoid awkwardness, not look petty, not create neighborhood tension. And honestly, that instinct is usually healthy. But there's a dangerous line where patience accidentally becomes permission. Once somebody realizes there are no consequences, they start expanding their behavior little by little until suddenly you're living inside someone else's version of reality. From a legal perspective, this is exactly why documentation and procedure matter so much in HOA neighborhoods and suburban communities. The calm person with evidence almost always wins over the loud person with opinions. And I think that's important because a lot of people hear stories like this and assume revenge solved everything. It really didn't. Structure solved it. Process solved it. Clear consequences solved it. I didn't beat Denise in some dramatic war between neighbors. I simply stopped negotiating with behavior that never respected negotiation in the first place. And weirdly enough, once consequences became automatic instead of emotional, the conflict died almost immediately. That's the part most people miss. Boundaries work best when they're boring, predictable, consistent. No speech is required, just cause and effect. Honestly, I still think about that third toe sometimes because it completely changed how I handle difficult people. You don't always need to out-yell somebody. You don't need clever comebacks. Sometimes the strongest move is quietly learning the rules better than the person trying to ignore them. Anyway, that's my nightmare suburban parking saga. And I'm curious now, what would you have done in my situation? Would you have called the tow company after the first warning? Or did Denise deserve all 3 lessons? Drop your thoughts in the comments because HOA stories are basically modern-day neighborhood warfare, and I know some of you have seen way crazier things than this.